Hello, everyone. Today we'll be reading from Hebrews chapter 13, verses 10 through 16. Feel free to read along. We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we have seeking the city which is to come. Through him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that give thanks to his name. Do not neglect to good the sharing, for with such sacrifice God is pleased. Word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, son. You may be seated. Okay. For the past few years, during the months of April to June, most of my Saturdays were spent in places that look like this. That's a track stadium for those of you who may not know. And that's because my two children, or at least two of my children, Kara and Connor, they run club track. And so during these months on Saturdays, I'm all over the city of Houston and even beyond at track meets watching them run. Now, as a track dad, I've had the privilege of watching many different races, right? The sprints, 100, 200, 300, 400, and 8. And then, of course, the long distance, the 1,500, almost a mile, and then the 3,000. Now, here's the thing about the long distance races, okay? Now, you can certainly tell the difference between good runners and bad runners in both the long and the short runs, right? But the differences, in my opinion, between the good and the bad runners are so much more glaringly apparent in the long races. And here's why. And it's because the long races take longer to finish. You see, in the short races, the races are over in less than a minute, usually sometimes in 10 to 15 to 20 seconds. And so in that short amount of time, all you're doing is looking at the really fast ones and just marveling, wow, why are they so fast? But in the long races, well, your eyes will first immediately go to those who just run well. I don't know if you know this about long distance runners, the ones who run well, they seem to glide and almost float in the air. It's just so elegant. You're like, oh my goodness, I wish I could run like that. And then, as soon as you're kind of captivated by that, immediately your attention will then go to, unfortunately, the bad runners who are just struggling. Right? And because this is kids track, there's always at least just one. And when you watch them run, your heart just breaks. Why? Because their faces are in just pure agony and misery. Their legs, they move like they weigh 100 pounds. You're supposed to be a runner. That's not the way it's supposed to look. And their feet are so heavy that they literally like you can hear it from the track. It's not supposed to be. The track is bouncy. It's like not supposed to be that way. They're sweating profusely. They're breathing heavily. They look like they're about to pass out. So basically, you're just kind of sitting there praying, oh, poor thing, just finish. Just don't pass out. And then it's not all that helpful because then usually if I'm a good announcer, the announcer will be like, okay, crowd, let's cheer on so-and-so. They're coming around the track, so on and so forth. And then to add insult to injury, in these long races, they almost always get lapped by the good ones. And they get lapped with at least one or sometimes two laps to go. So when the good ones finish, you're like, oh my goodness, they're so fast. And you're like, you just see them just slowly for another 5-6 minutes. And you're going, oh, poor thing, just please finish. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because if you've been here over the past few weeks, we're finishing up Hebrews, we've been told over and over again by our wonderful pastors in their sermons that this life, the Christian life of faith, is like running a long-distance race. Pastor Chris and Pastor John called it a marathon that they did not want to run. And while we can certainly dream that we would be the gliding, floating type of runners, unfortunately, we've been told over and over again that we are the struggling types. Why? Because the race, we've been told, is rough. We've been told that we must put aside all that encumbers us in order to run this way. We've been told that we must get rid of all the sin that so easily entangles us to run this way. We've been told that we must strengthen our weak and feeble knees and hands because, make no mistake, we will indeed face much difficulty and hostility, so much so that we will be tempted to give up and quit this race. We've been told over and over again, unfortunately, that we are, without a shadow of a doubt, those lumbering, stumbling runners so much more than the effortless, floating, gliding ones. And while we have been, I'm sure, encouraged by our pastors because they've done such a good job of doing so through the text, I wondered, have you maybe, just maybe, been wondering, but why? As in, why does the life of faith have to be this grueling marathon? Why can't the life of faith be like a water slide? Or for those of you Texans, if you've been to Austin, why can't it be like one of those lazy river rides where you ride in the tube and you float down the river and you just eat and drink and chat all day? Like, why can't it be like that? Why must it be so hard that we have to be given motivation and reminders, Pastor Chris did a couple weeks ago, that we won't quit halfway? Like, why, right? And if you were here last week, even with Pastor Chung teaching us what a life of faith versus a life of fear looks like, you may have noticed this, but did it occur to you that the 4 things he taught us, loving deeply, caring generously, honoring faithfully, living with trust, unclenching our fists, that those are things that I call aggravatingly and annoyingly difficult? And what I mean by that is these are 4 things, as Pastor Chung taught us last week, that we can right now definitively do. Like we have all the capability to do so. It's just that there are always things that we know to do, but we have such difficulty doing. Why? Because, well, we are either not very good at it, or if we're just really being honest, we don't really want to be good at it. Love continuously those who don't deserve it? Yeah, don't want to really be good at that. Take people in who are strangers, give hospitality to them, give them care. That's what hospitality meant in those days. Yeah, not really about that. Care for prisoners, pray for them. Let go of our need for money and be generous in all things. Yeah, I can do that right now. Don't really want to do that. There's nothing technically stopping us, well, unless you count our lack of desire maybe, or our inability to put aside our conveniences and sacrifice therefore, or simply using the language, our refusal to run the race. Well, because it's what? Long, it's hard, it's hot, I'm not naturally built for it, this life stage I'm in, it's not convenient for it, whatever it may be. Have you, maybe, just maybe, been wondering, why does it have to be this way? Well, the author tells us why. And the answer might surprise you. And it's something that we've been learning throughout since chapter 11. And the answer here is in verse 14. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. The reason why life of faith must be tough, why we have to be the struggling long-distance runners, because no matter what era, land, generation, culture you have, you name it, that we live in, those who live by faith in that era, land, culture, etc., will never quite feel comfortable in it, will never quite belong, and therefore will never quite feel at home, because we don't belong to whatever city you live in, we belong to a city that is to come. Through here in chapter 11, they described it a little more clearly. It says, by faith, Abram lived as an alien in the land of promise, for he was looking for a city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Then further he said, all these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them, having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. The reason why the life of faith is indeed a marathon and not a lazy river ride is because, simply put, living by faith makes you and I definitively aliens, strangers, or as we called it a few weeks ago, resident aliens. Remember this card? Being an owner of this card means that although we are able to live in a place legally, we don't actually belong in the place with which we live. Though we reside there permanently, hence permanent resident, we are still alien, aka not at home. We do, but we actually don't belong. We are, but we actually aren't at home. It's why E.T. all the time was wanting to phone home. Why? Because Earth was not his home and he knew it. But this raises another significant question, the one that's actually at the heart of what we're looking at today, and it's this. Does it have to be this way? Why does it have to be this way? As in, how come we can't be citizens here and citizens there? How come we have to perpetually not belong? Why is this the thing? Must it be this way? And the quick and short answer, unfortunately, for all of us is yes, it must. But the reasons why it must, I hope and I pray, will be not disheartening or disappointing, but worth and therefore a celebratory thing. And today, my prayer is that we would learn to embrace the status that we have as resident aliens, as those who live by faith in God and therefore trust Him and live faithfully in it. Amen? Didn't get a lot of amens there. It's okay. I understand. Here's how we're going to go about it. 3 things. First, what? What is a resident alien? What does it mean to be one? Second is how? How do we live as one? What are we called to do? And then third, why must we be resident aliens? Why is that a thing? Let's go through this really quickly. Not real quickly. First, being a resident alien. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but I wasn't actually born here. I'm technically a fob. I immigrated to the country with my parents at the age of 1. And although I've lived in the country 36 of my 41 years of life, I spent a few years in Korea between 4 and 8. I didn't become a citizen of this country until I was 24. And it only happened because I was planning on moving to Canada to go study and go get my master's in seminary. So for the first 24 years of my life, I was either a visa holder or a resident alien, some combination of the two, and yet always a citizen of South Korea, where I was born. Now, this never really impacted my life day to day as a young person growing up. But then as I got a little older, there were a few times where I really felt the weight of this, let me tell you. The first time was after college. I was trying to get a job. And as I did, I came upon a job opening through a friend of mine as a consultant with a company that was going to do business primarily with the DoD, the Department of Defense of our country. Now, I went to the interview. I did a great job, apparently, and I got the job on the spot. And although I studied sociology in college, I got the job, so I was super excited. And back in those days, this is 2006, the starting salary, this is big time money back then, at least in those days, right, was $60K. So I was like, ooh, I was amped. I was like, yeah, I'm going to make money. Like, yeah, let's go. So I was really excited. I was getting ready for the job. And then about 2 days before the job was supposed to begin, I get an email with all the preparatory things. Here's what you got to do, what you got to bring, so on and so forth. And chief among them was, make sure you bring your passport. So I was like, okay. And then I was like, wait, I haven't seen my passport in ages. I literally, once I came back when I was 8, I literally didn't leave the country. And so I was like, where's my passport? So then I asked my dad, and he had it in like one of those fire-safe boxes. I pulled it out, and the picture was me of a baby. As in, that was the original passport I entered with. Never got it. I was like, oh, shoot, I have an expired passport. So then I was like, wait. It's a South Korean passport. So you didn't even really Google things back then. We barely had internet. But I was like looking it up, and I was like, wow, how do you do this? So then I realized I had to call an embassy, and then that was really hard. And then I had to get an appointment, and that was like not months away. So I was panicking. So I was emailing my boss and be like, I'm sorry, my passport's expired, yada, yada, yada. And he was really cool about it. He's like, just bring in your old one. I know you're going to get renewed, so on and so forth. We're good. I was like, okay. So I took the embarrassing old passport, took it into work, and I went on the first day, and I was super excited. I handed it over to the HR person, went to my desk, and I started doing orientation, all the little rules you got to learn, yada, yada, yada. Then 2 hours in, somebody comes by and goes, you're wanted to be seen in the boss's office. What? Just go. Oh, okay. So I walked in there, and as soon as I opened the door, he goes, are you seriously trying to tell me that you're not a U.S. citizen? And I'm going, excuse me? Does that matter? Yes, it matters. We work with the Department of Defense. You need clearance. You can't get clearance unless you're a U.S. citizen. How did we? I don't know. How did you? I don't know. Well, I'm sorry, but unless we find you an internal role, you're probably going to get fired today because you have to have clearance to do this job. So, as you can probably guess, I got fired because I wasn't a U.S. citizen. It was at this point I realized, wait, because I have these sets of cards and I'm a permanent resident, though I speak English and I've been living here forever and cultured, all that kind of stuff, I'm qualified, so on and so forth, there are opportunities to me that just aren't available because I don't really belong to this place. And then the next time I felt the weight of the status was when I decided to go to Canada for seminary. Now, when I applied to the school, I wasn't yet a citizen, so I was like, oh, shoot, I better become a citizen before I go off to some other country for 5 or 6 years to get this degree, because, something crazy happens over there, or it happens to me, whatever. I may not be allowed in. Like, there's nothing secure about permanent residency, so I was like, I better hurry up. So I applied about 7 months before I went, hoping that I was going to get it. Well, when I went, I hadn't had it yet. And so in that first year, I had to come back multiple times, flying back and forth to make sure I interviewed and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, during that first year, I got it. But it was during this first year, before I became a citizen, where I really kind of felt this weight. The first time I tried to go into Canada with a student study permit, right, I didn't have enough proof of funds, so they denied me at the border. So I had to actually sleep at a hotel in Washington State, and then I got in the next day. But apparently I didn't know that, but when that happened, I got flagged. There was a big X next to my name. So every single time I tried to go into Canada, I would get pulled aside to other immigration officers, spend an extra half an hour telling the same story for 6 years. Every single time I went in, this was the case. And that sucked enough. But before I got my citizenship, when I would come back into the country, for whatever the reason, even when I was coming for an interview to become a citizen, they would ask me, where are you living? Why are you coming back for? Why are you out of the country? Just all these peppering me with questions with a very look that said, you don't belong and I have to make sure that you're allowed here. And then I got my citizenship. So I went back to Canada after I got it. Same issues crossing the border there. And then when I was coming back in, something marvelous happened. Walked up to the officer, passport, please. Handed him now this passport, the American passport, looked at, scanned it, looked at the screen for literally 5 seconds, handed it back to me, and then he said the words to me that became music to my ears. He said, "Welcome home." Welcome home. Now, I don't know why, but literally every single time I came back into the country, the officer, no matter who it was, "Welcome home." I had this thing where it was so ridiculous. We would drive, when we drove across the border, as soon as we got onto the American side of things, I had this thing where I pulled down the windows and I'd be like, "Air of my home." Like, it's so ridiculous. But the whole point is, throughout this entire thing, I deeply felt what it meant to not belong and then to belong. And then never mind, throughout this entire process, there was this deep nervousness that because I was a Korean citizen, that I might have to go to the army. And if you know me, I'm not army material. So I was sweating until I got my U.S. citizenship. So all of it, being a resident alien or worse, is a very disorienting thing if you know what that feels like. Because you significantly know that although you live here, you work here, you make life here, and although you can trick yourself into thinking that maybe you belong and therefore you're American, you quickly realize through different things that you are not. Why? Because I'm a permanent resident. Though I live here, this country has no loyalty to me. In fact, the country to which I really belong has actual authority over me. I have to live by those laws. And again, for those of you who do not have official status, even permanent residence here, every time I went to Canada, I never felt very comfortable because I knew anytime they wanted, they could kick me out and say, "Get out, you don't belong here." Now, I tell you all this because all this is very important if we're going to understand what the author is going to tell us or trying to tell us. It's because what he's saying is that though we live here on this earth, and we live in a certain country, in a certain era, with different customs, traditions, and laws, that we are called to be, meant to be, perhaps more importantly, to belong to a different city and a city that is to come, which means we can never quite belong here. And this is huge. Because if you know the way that cities and the roles that cities play in the Bible, it's huge. In the Bible, a city is much like the way that a country functions in our modern world. Just like a country governs the people that they live in those days, cities governed the people. It's the cities set the rules. The cities was the civilization. Why? Because if you didn't live in a city, you lived on the farm. And on the farm, you made your own rules because it was your own land. So in the ancient world, life in the city was where civilization was, politics was, and everything was. It's where life happened in such a way where someone governed it. And so when the author tells us that here we do not belong to a city, we do not have a lasting city, but belong to a city that is to come. What we're saying is that we're looking for a city that is indeed different than the one we live in now. We're being told that whatever the customs, rules, laws, politics, the ways of life of the city or country that we live in now, we're being told two things. One, they are not anything like the customs of the city that is to come, and perhaps most importantly, that no matter what city, era, customs, life you live in, no matter what it is, it simply will not last. The reality for every Christian, whether it be the first Christians, right, in the book of Acts to us now, no matter where we live, is that we're always going to live in this kind of two-city life. 1 foot in the city with which you live, and 1 foot journeying to the one that is to come. And that type of living, as it was when I tried to get that job or when I tried to go study in Canada, will always create a tension that because and even though we live here, we will never fully quite belong here, but rather we want to belong there. And although we may not like it and hope it would be different, the place in which we live now will never be, shall never be, indeed can't ever be home, because the Christian life is the journey to the city of God, the one city that God has built for us, prepared for us. And until we get to that city, or until that city comes to us, we will never indeed feel home, which means if you feel at home, something is awry. Because we don't belong here. Now, here's where things can get a little complicated, just being honest, and therefore a little tricky. Depending on what era and time you live in, there will be times where the ways of the city in which you live might match in some ways to the heavenly city. But make no mistake, That no matter how some of it may match, in the long run, in the end, make no mistake, they will at one point disagree, clash, and cause tension. Let me give you some examples. Eastern cultures, like mine, Korean culture, we stress family over individuals. We stress family over individuals at all things, greater society over individuals even. And many people have pointed out how this is in many ways the way that the Christian ethic works. That we value the body, the Christian body, the community over ourselves. We sacrifice for the body over our own good. And so they're like, oh, those two are in line. But if you kind of trace the Eastern cultures long enough, the traditional ones, the ones that do family over individual, you'll eventually realize that family over individuals oftentimes in many cultures means father over individual, aka you better do whatever your patriarch tells you to do. And that father is also over God. But we've been told many times, Jesus has emphasized it many times, that no. God is the ultimate authority, not who our father is or anything about that. So then you realize they clash. Or another example, take the way that the Bible talks about love and sexuality, actually. In many of these family-oriented cultures of the East, sexuality is oftentimes quite strict and rigid. It's all about family. It's all about having kids. It's all about producing heirs for the next line, right? It's all about producing the next, in my case, Chung, and so on and so forth. And sometimes we may think this lines up with the biblical way because we kind of see some of that, right, in the Bible. Or in many ways, therefore, these Eastern cultures are a little prudish about sex and sexuality. But if you actually read the Bible and if you understand it, the Bible is not prudish about sex at all. If you need proof, go read Songs of Solomon. Trust me. Go in with an open mind. You'll need it. Or in Genesis, do you know what the apex of creation is? All the people who do premarital with me, they know. The apex of creation is the union, the two becoming one in marriage, consummated by, yes, sex. So then some will say, well, actually, that's quite like the individualistic cultures that we live in, that celebrate sexual freedom. Oh, the Bible is actually cool about sex? Whoa, that's amazing. But actually, it isn't. Why? Because most individualistic cultures take this celebration of sexual freedom way too far, where then sex becomes a choice, a commodity, a pleasure, something that we can do as we wish to enjoy and to experience. Why? Because it's good and we should be able to do whatever we want with it. But the Bible also makes it very clear that no, sex is only properly enjoyed within a committed covenant relationship of marriage. Why? Because sex is so profound and so powerful that it can only be in that place in order for it to be properly enjoyed, which of course flies in the face of most, if not all, individual cultures and their ideas of sex. So you'll see throughout history, now, past, and future, that the ways of God and His city and His life will always profoundly clash with the ways of whatever city and country and way of life you live. That the ways of God, the life of faith, will at some point disagree, butt heads, and it is our call to indeed live on the side that butt heads with it. Which means that what we're called to do is to resist adopting the values and the ways of life of the city that isn't going to last, but rather adopt the ways and the values and live according to the ways of the city that is indeed going to last. The human order, the society, the civilization that God has built, not that someone else has built. That's what it means to be a resident alien. Now, at this juncture, some of you might be like, wait a minute, Pastor Pete, but I have an idea. How come then we can't just live like perpetual visitors, foreigners, tourists maybe? And though that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if we do, then we can avoid the tension of being resident aliens and still kind of just do our thing. How come we can't do that? Well, it's because of how we're called to be a resident alien. Over the past few weeks, I was privileged to be able to travel to Italy to officiate a wedding. Grace and Joel are here. And by their graciousness and generosity, Christina and I, we got to go not only to Italy to officiate a wedding, but we also got to travel to other cities because, well, we took some time ahead and after the wedding. Now, because we had never been to Italy before, I did a lot of research on what to see, mostly what to eat. We ate gelato every day. I keep telling you that because I keep having dreams about it. But anyways, and then also what to do, what not to do, how not to be a tourist, how to dress, all that sort of stuff. I watched a lot of different things, read a lot of things. I wanted to not be the stereotypical foreigner and tourist. I wanted to fit in. So I took heed of the lessons that I did. We packed our clothes accordingly, yada, 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 and then we tried not to go to so many tourist trap eats and all that kind of stuff. We wanted to see the land and go where the locals go and live like a local as best as possible. So we tried. to be as local as possible. But the reality was, we realized that no matter how hard we tried, we would actually never be a local. Well, there's many reasons. One, we don't speak the language, so immediately we're not a local. Secondly, we don't really know the customs. No matter how much we learn on YouTube, we just really don't know. And although we tried to be really like not touristy, there were times where we were like, you know what? Let's just be a tourist because it's so much easier. Because we realized, wait, if we try to be like a local, then we have to like try to do all these things that don't really fit us. And we realized, wait, being a tourist is kind of nice because they know we're tourists. And so they'll even give us a side look and be like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that, yada, 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 blah, blah, you're too loud, whatever the case might be. They let us go. Why? Because we're tourists, stupid tourists. Right? And they just let you go. It's easy that way. And so though we wanted to be like a local, be respectful of their culture, we just simply said, you know what, let's just be touristy. Who cares? Like, we're not coming back for this place for a long time. No one's going to remember us. Let's just do it. And so some of us might be thinking, well, how come we can't live like that? Isn't that a really cool way to live? Why do we have to live in the tension of being here, living here permanently, which means we have to abide by the rules and the laws, learn the language, all that sort of stuff? Why can't we just be like that? And here's the reason. We learned last week that the life of faith, as a resident alien in this case, is to what? Love well. Love people. Be hospitable. Be generous, so on and so forth. Love prisoners even. Yada, yada, yada. And if you really kind of dig deep into this message, you realize how profound this message is, because what we're then being called to do, if we're indeed a resident alien, which we must be, is this. We're then being called to love a city that will never love you back, that will never accept you, that will never actually take you in as one of their own. And actually the author doubles down and makes it abundantly clear in verse 16. He says, do not neglect doing good and sharing to the city that don't like you, but in which you live. And that word sharing literally means to share income. Be generous. And if you think this is kind of maybe taken out of context, actually the Old Testament doubles down on this type of resident alien living as the way that we should be, loving a city that doesn't love you back and being the best kind of resident alien you could be. And that actually the story is in Jeremiah 29. If you know Jeremiah 29, this is a famous passage where we get this famous, the verse, for I know the plans I have for you. It's on this placard all over the place, yada, yada, yada. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have these things, but oftentimes I feel like we don't actually understand what this verse means. Because do you know what happens right before this verse? It's actually quite fascinating. God tells the people this verse after he's banished them to exile in Babylon. And then he tells them instructions on how they live, and then he tells them this verse. Let me read it to you. Verses 4-7. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. That takes time. Take wives and become fathers of sons and daughters of their people. Take wives for your sons and give daughters to your husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, and multiply there and do not decrease. Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, and pray to Yahweh on its behalf, for in its welfare you will have welfare. He says, don't live aloof from that place as visitors or tourists. Don't ignore them, but live there. Live there. Take wives there. Build families there. Multiply there. Live in the city. Love in the city to the degree that you'd pray and seek and therefore achieve their good, their blessing, their welfare, because their welfare, their good, their peace is tied to your welfare, your good, and your peace. And if you think about how strict God was about not intermarrying and all that kind of stuff, this is astonishing, isn't it? And you go, wait, why? Well, then he tells you, and this is where verse 11 comes from, verse 10-14. For thus says Yahweh, when 70 years have been completed from Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you. I'm going to bring you back. But you're going to have to do all these things that I'm telling you now because I have plans. You may not understand them, it may not make any sense, but I have these things that you must do. And then when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will listen. You will seek me and find me. And when you search for me with all your heart, I will be found. Now you can finally find me, declares Yahweh. And I will restore your fortunes and gather you from the nations, from all the places where I've driven you, declares Yahweh. And I will bring you back to the place from where I've sent you into exile. What we're being told is while we live in exile, while we live as resident aliens then, Our call is to live our best in that place for the good of the city, for the good of the people. It's flourishing. Even when the city doesn't love you back, even when they remind you that you don't belong, even when they say you are not one of us, even when there's always tension. Why? Because God is wanting to bring us back to the place to which we belong. And here's the thing, the us is not just Israel. Because in the New Testament, what happens? God brings Jews and Gentiles, all of us. Why must we be resident aliens? And how? If you can flip this, oh, there we go. It's because that's the way God is going to bring us back. That's the way, indeed, we're going to be. And if you're like, well, how do I do that? Well, the best example you can look at is Jesus. Jesus is the best resident alien the world has ever known. Do you know that? His home is in heaven. But he came to the earth, took on skin he didn't have, and he lived here perfectly, did good for everyone who lived here. But he didn't just live here following every custom of the Jews. No. He went against many of those Jews. For the ones he went against, he got crucified. He was generous to the beggars and the poor. He ate with the sinners and the prostitutes. He fundamentally understood what it meant to be. Why? Because that's the way you win people. And at this point, if you're like, well, Pastor Pete, okay, that sounds really cool, but man, that's still really heavy. Like, does it really have to be this way? Well, yes, it does, and here's why, and this is where we finish. The all-important reason why we must be resident aliens if we're going to be living the life of faith. If you want to put it in today's terms, maybe you're wondering, well, how come we can't be like dual citizens? That's what my wife is, Canada and America, right? If you dual citizens, that's like cool. Like when you go to Canada, she can start doing Canadian things. She says A when she goes to Canada. When she comes here, she says y'all, right? Like that you can kind of do both. Although, go ask Christina. She's not very Canadian anymore, which I'm sure Will back there is kind of shaking his head because he's a great Canadian. Why can we do that? Well, because a couple things. One, jokingly, you can never be both at the same time. When you're over there, you can be one. When you're over here, you can be one. You can't be both, okay? And so you got to choose wherever you are, and that's choice number one. But the more important reason is this, and it's all contained in our text. Here's why it must be this way. Let's read this together, verses 10 through 14, nice and slow, shall we? We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Oh, flip. Can you flip it for me? There we go. Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. Here's why we must be resident aliens and why it's important. I hope you're not approaching what you're hearing today as kind of like this, I got to do this thing that I don't like. Because what the author is telling us is very significant. He's saying if you're going to be a resident alien, the reason why you must be a resident alien is that you don't have to just take it kind of like begrudgingly. You have to embrace being a resident alien because that's the way to live if we're going to make it to the city. Did you hear that? It's only when we embrace the tension, only when we go out to him, only when we bear his reproach, his shame, and live as he did, will we continually possess the transformational power of the gospel. Put it a different way, if you try to lose this tension, which many of us will do all the time, then you're going to lose the power of the gospel. And if you lose the power of the gospel, guess what you lose? You lose your citizenship to the city that is to come. Now, if you're wondering, why? Well, here's why. Notice what it says. It says, right? Where am I? Here, verse 10. We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by high priest as offering for sin are burned outside the camp. If you remember from a couple weeks ago, or however many weeks ago it was, right? For them to get sacrifice done for them, they have to go inside, right, the tabernacle. And then all the blood is shed. What we're being told is that then the body of that animal, which the blood was shed, is taken outside the camp and then burned. This is significant because the blood is the thing that won them or that granted them the sacrifice and the cleansing, right? But if you notice, Jesus has to go outside the camp to both shed blood and to be, quote unquote, burned, crucified, buried. And this is significant because what it means is that the sacrifice and the thing that makes us who we are must happen outside the city gates. And if you're understanding the way city life happens, remember what I told you earlier? Everything within the city abides by the city's laws. Everything on the outside, you're a foreigner, you're a farmer, you're a hick, you're whatever it is that you want to call. You don't belong in the city. So when Jesus goes outside the city to do the sacrifice, it means if you want to receive the powers of the sacrifice, the forgiveness and the anointing and the redeeming, you have to go outside the city. You have to make yourself a foreigner. But here's why this thing actually really matters. You see, whereas being U.S. and Canadian citizen, they kind of overlap. There's some similarities. The citizenship of this country or this city, whatever city it is, the earthly city versus the heavenly one, they don't match. And actually, the one here, if you try to live by this a little bit, if you try to do my dual citizenship picture is like during the week you live as an earthly citizen and on Sunday you live as a heavenly citizen, that kind of idea. If you do this, you know what will happen to you? You'll eventually become a full citizen of this and this place only. You know why? Because in this place there's a thing called sin. And in chapter 12, the author told us that sin entangles. You can't live in sin and not be entangled by it. Try it. It don't work. So practically, if you try to live here and then kind of do like this thing where you're going back and forth, it's not going to work. You're going to be stuck here. But more importantly, the reason why we must always be resident aliens is this, and this is where things get amazing. You can go ahead and flip to the end and just at the title slide. At this point, depending on the kind of Christian that you are, you might be hearing this message and be like, all right, Pastor Pete, I heard you loud and clear. I'm going to become a resident alien. I'm going to embrace it. It kind of sucks, the tension. I'm not liking it, all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to try it. But I got news for you. Anyone who's tried that approach, how well does that go? And for how long? It don't work well. It can't. Because you and I don't have what it takes to live as that citizen. So then how does it work? And this is the beauty of it all. The only way we become heavenly citizens is when we receive the free gift that God has given to us, right? Like if you notice in the Bible doesn't ever say, hey, do this because Jesus did. Do you know the way that the Bible teaches you that we should be like Jesus? He goes, see the God who did it, receive the blessing of it, and then you're going to naturally want to do it. See the one who loves in a way that no one else loves, and then you're going to want to love that way. See the one who's so generous that he would give up all of his heavenly riches and become poor to the point of death for you, and then you will willingly give up your riches to become poor for somebody else. The only way the gospel works is when you look at the one who did it, to do the thing that you and I could never do no matter how hard we try, be transformed by it, and then to live it because we want to, because there's no other way to live. It's why then the text says to us, we must go outside the camp. We got to make our way outside the camp and see the thing that Jesus did, bear his reproach, his shame, and go, that's the way. And then when you receive that, then you turn back into the city in which you live and you go, I want to make this place a bit more like the heavenly city from which I come. Jesus says, Christians, you know where you're supposed to be? A light on a hill. Actually, he says a city on a hill, which means this gathering of people right here, we're meant to be a gathering of the city that is to come, a glimpse of it on a hill for everyone else to see. And the only way you're going to do that is for you to continually go outside the city, knowing that as you're doing so, you're leaving the one in which you live behind and being, I will be a foreigner, I will be a resident alien, and I'm going to receive this grace. And when you do, then we're going to gather as one, as a body that has embodied his thing, his reproach, his shame, his blessing, his grace, and then we'll look to the city and say, I want to love that city. Why must you be resident aliens? Because if you don't, if you aren't willing to embrace that status, you'll be nothing but a citizen of the city with which you live. And if you live in this city and become a citizen, you'll die just like that city. So the call, church, one question is, if I look at my life, to which do I belong? But the better and bigger question that I wish you would go away asking is, how much do I want to go outside the city to the King who bore all of my shame? The King who is so generous that he would give his life so that I could have mine. Where do I want to be? How much do I want to point my eyes, ask the Spirit to say, I want to embrace you, oh God. Because I want to live in a city that will never end. I want to live in a way in which joy doesn't end. You know the description of the city that is to come? Here's the thing about that in Revelation, right? You know the description. A city that's perfect, immaculate, no tears, no mourning, no crying, and no death in particular. Every time I hear it, I go, oh, how I long for that city. We're going to sing a song, how I long for that city. But then the reality hits. In order to belong to that city, you got to then denounce this one. You're going to live the way that he calls you to in that one. And that living is never easy. I was reminded recently that a couple weeks ago, that as I was screaming resident alien, that I didn't do favors for many who don't even have that status. And then it dawned on me as I was preparing for this one, that some of you, by the blessing of always been a citizen in this country, don't ever know what that tension is like. But I'm praying for that tension over you. Because only when you embrace the tension will you have the power that transforms you. Only when you say, I want to live in that tension because I know I don't belong here, but rather I belong to something way better. I just said I have to wait for it. Then will you live for that? And then here's the kicker. When you live for this, the brokenness of this gets healed. When you live for this, the brokenness of all that you feel, the conveniences and the things that you think are good for you, that are revealed to not be, will eventually be redeemed and restored. May you, church, embrace the life of a resident alien. Embrace the tension. Not because tension is good, but because we don't belong here. We belong somewhere greater. More importantly, the one who came to save us is wanting us to be with him. My favorite verse in Hebrews will always be, for the joy set before him, Christ embraced and therefore endured the tension, actually went through it in a way that we will never, dying on the cross, rising again so that we will always be with him. May you embrace the tension, knowing that he's already done everything for you to have life that does not end in a city that cannot fade. In being so, church, may you be the light, city on a hill, for all the world to see, to say that's what true living is. May you be blessed by it and in turn be a blessing unto the world that God loves.